Hi guys, now we are crossing the famous London Bridge. I'm really stunning with me, my bro, and my mom. So we are crossing this London Bridge. Wow, this is so giant. This is awesome. And as you see, from the middle, it can open up while a big ship will pass. That's a very nice bridge. Wow, it's really great. This is really awesome. This is Porthos. So slowly we are moving towards Greenwich, where time is zero. It's really great.
Ladies and gentlemen, welcome again to the City Alpha. So we're on the way down to Greenwich now. We're going to be in Greenwich in about half an hour. Just leaving the pier for the passengers on board, we are just required to point the safety out. So it's never to alarm anybody, just a legal requirement. Like every passenger boat, we are of course fully equipped with all of the up-to-date equipment that's needed. Comes in the form of the life rafts and the life jackets. Everything stored around you is marked with a green and cream sticker. All of the crew are fully trained, and in the unlikely event of any sort of emergency, just follow any instruction that's given, and you'll hear announcements that go over the PA system. But there really is no need to worry. Sit back, relax, and enjoy the cruise. Now, along the way, I'll continue pointing out a few of the buildings we go past. So we are fitted with a pre-recorded commentary system, but we don't like to use the computers. So in this part of the Thames especially, they're not very good, so we do prefer to do a live commentary instead. And hopefully that does add to the trip. So if you have your cameras ready with your photos, it's a nice view behind you to start. Always nice to get a photo of Tower Bridge from here, because you get framed through the bridge to St Paul's Cathedral. So it does make for a nice photo to take. So if you have your cameras, nice view behind us. The areas around us now. So the areas around us now, we've got the East End of London to your left, and we've got South London on your right. The East End, much more notorious, of course, famous areas today, which I'm sure you've heard of before. The East End, famous for Cockneys. You've got the Cray twins, the infamous East End gangsters, the twin brothers. They ran the area in the 60s. You got Jack the Ripper in the 1800s, where the young ladies were murdered by the notorious Jack the Ripper. So all of these people together, they make the area very well known. I'm sure you've heard of it before, the East End. It runs from Tower Bridge to Canary Wharf. We go further east, and you'll be in East London. Well, this is the East End to your left. On your right, we're going to go through Bermondsey, you go through Rotherhithe, Deptford, and then we're going to be in Greenwich. So South London, south of the river, South London. Most of what you're going to see now on the journey down to Greenwich is apartments. So you can see a lot of these buildings around you, they're multi-million-pound apartments. The price in this area of the Thames, you'll pay between 10 and 15 million pounds for a two-bedroom apartment. Because what you really pay for, of course, is the view that you get. And that view behind us, you pay millions to see it. So every single day from your apartment, of course, that's what you pay for. This apartment to your left, you see the American flag flying from the roof. It's called Oliver's Wharf, and this was an old warehouse converted today into apartments. Famous people have lived in this building. Over the years, you've had Dame Helen Mirren live here. You've had Robert De Niro. You've had the singer, the actress Cher. They've all lived in apartments in that building. The bottom of the building, you see a pub. See the staircase, top of the stairs, you see the pub. That's called the Town of Ramsgate. And that pub, it was famous for pirates. They would take pirates into this pub before they were executed. There was a punishment for piracy, it was execution. And the execution took place around the bend in front of us. This bend, there's a low tide, and on the low water period, there's a stony foreshore. They called it Execution Dock. They would bring pirates here, and they would be chained to the riverbeds. So they would chain pirates up and leave them to drown. Chained up on the low tide, the tide would come back, slowly drown that pirate as the tide would rise. That punishment, it was known as the grace of Wapping. Wapping is the name of the area to your left. And there was a famous punishment years ago. Piracy was a massive problem, and hundreds of pirates were executed in that way, being drowned on the foreshore here to your left. In 1798, they started the police force. You can see the police boats, they're based here to your left. And they are the oldest uniformed police force in the world. They started up 1798. Started up to tackle the piracy and the thieving that was taking place. Because pirate ships would come up this river. And you can imagine, with no CCTV to the buildings, no security, there was no police force either, and piracy became a big problem. Such a problem, there was a police force on this river before there was any mention of any police force anywhere else in the world. And they were brought here to tackle the thieving that was taking place. You can see a pub to your left, the Captain Kidd. That pub is named after a Scottish pirate. His name was Captain William Kidd, and he was the last man to be executed on the Thames. So they built a pub named it after him, built on the sites of Execution Dock. Captain William Kidd. Captain Kidd, he wasn't chained to the riverbed, he was hung from the river wall. So he was hanging on the low tide, left to drown as the tide came back. Is everybody happy?
Yeah.
The pre-recorded commentary doesn't mention enough really about the executions that took place on this river. So we like to mention it live. And here on your right, there's a pub. This pub is called the Mayflower, and that pub was built in, I don't know when it was built to be honest with you, but it's named after the pilgrim ship, the Mayflower. So named after that pilgrim ship, and you can see the American flag flies at the front. And look on the rooflet, there's a weather vane. That's a replica to that ship. Hard to see it now, look with the scaffolding, but it is there. A replica to the pilgrim ship. The pilgrim ship set sail from this area in 1620. So 1620, the pilgrim ship left, went down the Thames, around the coast of the country, picking up the Pilgrim Fathers and eventually going off to what you now know as the United States of America. That famous voyage, the journey, they say it started here in Rotherhithe in South London. So if you're from America, you might like to visit that pub, the Mayflower, walk around the area, visit the beach as well. Look at that. Look. You don't get beaches like that in America, do you? So that's where you might like to go as well. Look. Rotherhithe's finest beach. South Bank Rotherhithe. Now this is an old pub to your left. This pub next to the tree. That pub was built in 1515, so I don't know how old this one is. That's the oldest pub in the tidal part of the Thames. So that's the oldest pub in this part of the river, basically built in 1515. The Prospect of Whitby, when it was built, it was called the Pelican. But this pub had a nickname. They called it the Devil's Tavern. It became notorious for pickpockets, thieves and murderers. Ladies of the night. So a famous pub, notorious years ago, in the East End of London. Gave it the nickname, the Devil's Tavern. The area here on the river, they call it the Devil's Punch Bowl. They say this is where pirates would come to thieve. They say that pirates would come up, anchor their ships, they would row ashore, they'd rob the buildings, get back on their ships, and they would disappear off to sea. So you can imagine how easy that would have been to thieve from these buildings. And the reason they came here is because the areas around you is where the expensive cargo would have been stored, especially in the area to your left. In the East End of London, you had docks, and you had the London Dock, and you had St Catherine's Dock. And this is where you would have found ivory. You have ivory tusks, you would have had silk, you'd have had tea and spices from all over the world, you had gold and silver, alcohol and tobacco. It was all stored in these areas. So you can imagine how much thieving would have took place in the East End. You have to remember as well about these areas, these are expensive areas to live today. These areas around you, they were the poorest areas in this country. They say these were slum areas. You had expensive cargo stored, but it was very poor, these areas. So people, to make a living in these areas, they would steal the cargo that was being delivered. You imagine being so poor, you'd have a warehouse, no security, and you'd have goods from all over the world. So people would steal the cargo to make a living. This building to your right, that's an old warehouse, and it stored rice. So people would use the goods as sort of trading. They would trade goods. People would steal, they'd trade it with other residents to keep alive, to make a living. And rice was stored here to your right. Globe Wharf, an old warehouse. See, a lot of the cranes get left on the front as well. Kept very traditional. Multi-million-pound apartments today. And they say there was a rat-infested building storing rice. Globe Wharf. These buildings to your right, these are new apartments. You can see how with the new apartments, they have the road that runs in front. They've either got a pathway or a road that runs in front. That's the requirement for a new building on this river. They have to have a road or a pathway. But the old warehouses, they come flush to the Thames, right up to the river wall. That's how you can tell the difference between an old warehouse and a new property on the river. This pub to your left, that red brick pub, that's called the Narrow. That pub is owned by Gordon Ramsay, the celebrity chef. So if you've heard of that chef before, the celebrity chef, he owns this pub. Built on the entranceway to the marina. See, the bridge crosses the gap. This is the Limehouse Marina. With a small boat, a little canal boat, you go through this marina and you go out the other side. And you join onto the canal network of this country. You join onto the Regent's Canal. That takes you through to the Grand Union Canal. And that's where you got access to over 2,000 miles of canal system. And through the middle of the country, you can reach the Midlands. You go for about 180 hand-operated locks. It's a beautiful journey through the middle of the country. So it's a long way to get to the end, about 3 weeks to get up to the end. They're using the canals. They would use the canals years ago to distribute cargo all over the country. You imagine the ships would bring the cargo here. The cargo would be unloaded into small barges, canal barges, and then be towed through the canals. You'd have horses tow the barges through the canals. If you've seen programs on the telly like Peaky Blinders, see how they use the canals to bring the goods down from Birmingham. That's what they would have done, is moving cargo around the country. This pub to your left, that's called the Grapes. See the white buildings? The next to them, look, the gold lettering on the roof with the balconies. That pub was made famous by Charles Dickens. Charles Dickens lived in the attics to that pub. And it's from that pub that Charles Dickens wrote novels, Great Expectations and Our Mutual Friends. And today that pub is owned by Sir Ian McKellen. So Sir Ian McKellen, the famous actor, he owns that pub. And he also lives a few doors away. See the statue, the yellow statue, the statue of the man, that is Sir Ian McKellen's Riverside apartment, his London home, Riverside apartment there. He's lived there for a long time, famously living there. And he was, of course, going into the pub quite often. They were going to sell that pub, and they were going to sell it to developers that were going to turn the pub into apartments. So him and a group of friends, they bought the pub to keep it running, and they still run it today. Kept very traditional as well, the Grapes, and this area, Limehouse.